Hello, everyone. Welcome to Marketing to Your Audience. Please stand by. I'm just getting your host, Brian Newman, as well as the other panelists on board. So just give me 1 second. I think I know who everybody is.
Thanks.
All right, I'm in.
There's Rob. So we're just missing Dan and Lucy. Okay, there's Dan. And Lucy.
You got to get a wider angle camera. I'm always like taking up the whole thing.
I need a way smaller angle camera.
I need a eye, you know.
All right. So I think we're all here and we'll get started. My name is Brian Newman and I'm moderating the panel today. And I'd like to thank Paul, who just set us up and introduced us, and John and everyone with the Filmocracy team for having us here today. We're all learning this new software as we go. So thanks for your help with that too. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists. I'm going to let them each say a bit about themselves to start. And I'm going to go alphabetically with the intros here by last name and start with Justin Giddings. Justin, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah. I'm a classically trained actor turned filmmaker. Kind of got tired of waiting for permission to be creative. And my first foray into that was crowdfunding about $100,000 for my 2 short films. And that led to having a film career. In fact, I have a big meeting tonight, fingers crossed. But the thing was that people started reaching out to me for help with their campaigns. And my clients have now raised about $6.5 million for independent film. And so guerrilla marketing and that kind of thing is my jam. And then I also run Film Festival Mastery, which is co-founded with John Fitzgerald, who was the head of programming for Filmocracy Fest.
That's great. And maybe we can put that into the chat when you get a chance, so people can find your site.
Some links.
Can do that as well. And next up, I'd like to introduce Rob Hardy. Rob?
What's up, y'all? Thanks for having me. So I early on realized that indie filmmaking was not a great way to make a living. So I went off to work in the marketing world, and just through a series of coincidences, sort of came back to film a few years later and started finding ways to marry the two. So for the past 2 or 3 years, it's been really for me about finding ways to sell directly to fans and identify niche audiences that you can own the relationship with and truly build a long-lasting career making work that you love. So I run a little site called Filmmaker Freedom, where I get really, really into the weeds on how to do this stuff and how to market respectfully and authentically and stand out in the noise. And yeah, that's really the thing.
Thanks. Dan Harlow from Bunker 15.
Yeah, hi. I'm somewhat new to the film industry, actually. I was a technical guy for many years. I ran a tech company for like 20-something years. Programmer originally, actually. I ended up having about six offices across the country. I sold it. I didn't do anything for a while. And then I figured that I would move back to Southern California. And I'm like, what do they do in Southern California? Well, they make movies, so I'll go do that. That sounds easy, like super. Eventually, I tried to figure out some way I could contribute, using technology. And so now I have this company that sort of uses software to match small films with journalists who will write about your film. Because there's this increasing number of films being made and a decreasing number of journalists out there. So to be able to secure film writers that will actually review your film, Rotten Tomatoes certified writers that will review your film, or just write about, interview your director or your producer, that's a difficult thing to get done, and it's valuable. So that's what we do, and that's how we sort of contribute.
That's great. Thank you. And last but not least, Lucy Rendler-Kaplan. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Guys,
Hi.
I'm Lucy. I grew up as a kid actor, and then left that to start a marketing company. So I run RK Marketing and PR, and we focus on lifestyle marketing. So we do a ton of social media for films and for actors, teaching them how best to cut through the noise and reach the people that we want to be reaching in a creative way.
Sweet.
As I mentioned, my name is Brian Newman. I'm the moderator, and I also work in marketing, mainly on distribution and marketing for brands that are making films now. But for today, and I think it's appropriate, I'm going to pretend that I know nothing because I, compared to these guys, know nothing, and want to learn from them. And I said I was going to start with a different question, but I actually want to change course a bit, listening to everyone introduce themselves. I want to ask, for the filmmakers out there, when do you start thinking about marketing for your films? I'm assuming very early, but can one of you, Justin, you do a lot of stuff at the beginning with crowdfunding. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts, and then I'll ask the rest of the panelists their thoughts on when to start as well.
Yeah. So when I have an idea for a film, I go and make a Facebook page and a Twitter profile. And I imagine everybody else on here is going to say similar piece of feedback, which is as soon as possible. Building that audience, you can't start too soon. I know that Lucy and Rob both, turning this into, monetization and influencer building, they'll get into some of that stuff. But particularly from my sort of niche, the finding and targeting, figuring out who your target audience is, for one, and then finding out where they exist online and engaging with them and kind of getting into that club is an essential step to monetizing that audience early on, at least in terms of crowdfunding. And I would venture to guess, as the other panelists will probably get into, monetizing that throughout the entirety of the life cycle of the film, getting into festivals. Little tiny actions that you take every day consistently build up over time. My short film, we shot it 5 years ago, and just every day we did the work. And by the time we were going to festivals, we had 21,000 sci-fi fans as followers. So our stuff got retweeted and we got invited to more festivals. So whether you're at the beginning with, like I said, literally, I will have a script idea and I'll go get that Facebook page so that when I'm ready, I can start populating it with content. So, immediately, I think, is the answer, at least from my perspective.
Sure, and everyone's shaking their heads yes, but as part of a follow-up to that, I'd like to ask for whoever wants to jump in next. We probably everyone on this that's listening to us today uses Facebook and knows they need to be there and is thinking of getting on there early. But what do you do? Like, what's your actual first step? Like, you start a Facebook page, but beyond, when you're trying to get beyond your family and friends, what do you do to start building that core audience or your niche audience at the very beginning?
I'll jump in. So we start with who we want to be talking with. Who do we think once you set up that Facebook page and your Twitter and your Instagram, which I would suggest are your top 3 to start with, you want to start bringing people in to tell the story as you tell the story. I want someone to feel like they're a part of it from day one, no matter what step they come in at. And that means really delving in and learning who we want to reach, where they are, like Justin said, and how they want to be reached. Just because I have something I want to talk about doesn't mean that I should be creating videos every day. Some people love videos. As a social media manager, it's odd to say, but I hate creating videos. I don't ever watch videos. If I do, the sound is off. So I am completely the opposite of who we want to be targeting. But I'll start looking at those people and if I don't have people in mind of who I want to be talking to, I'll create ideas or personas. So I'll create, let's say, a Daniel, and I'll decide who he is and how he likes to go see movies and how often he likes to receive content. And then I'll start with a little bit of creative teasers as I'm first building my film and shooting the film. But more, I want people to know who I am. I want people to know who the team is behind the scenes. So we're going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to comment on people's posts that we want to get in front of. And we're really going to start just like as if you and I were talking at a coffee shop. We're going to start building that relationship.
That's great. Rob, what else do you think to add?
So I agree with everything that's just been said, but there's one step that I think is a little more foundational. It's not getting into the weeds on tactics yet, but it's obviously starting with who it's for, getting very, very specific about the niche for this film. But before you go start creating pages or content or anything, for me, it's really important to get into the question of why should this group of people care about what it is that you're making, and why is what you're making worth their attention, given the fact that they have likely thousands of other options competing for their attention at any given moment in time. So it's really trying to figure out your positioning ahead of time, identifying maybe specific subsections of this market that are underserved by the traditional content. They're looking for something very specific, but they aren't necessarily getting it from mainstream films. How can you serve them better than anybody else? And when you really find that angle, you find that thing that makes you unique, that makes you uniquely worthy of a specific group's of attention, that's the core of the messaging, right? That's the thing that you keep hammering on over and over. It's not just, hey, we made a sci-fi film. Oh, we made a queer sci-fi film that's also schlocky from the 70s. Whatever your unique combination of things is, that needs to be the core of the message as you're setting up your profiles and you're connecting with everything else. That's the center of the brand that you're building.
Makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And how early is, you're dealing with your audience very early, but how do you figure out the right balance of what to share about your film too early versus, holding things back? Can you start, are there things you shouldn't be doing too early and you should be waiting till you get closer to a festival premiere? Or do you feel like you just start going and just keep building that audience? I always get asked by filmmakers, is it too early for me to start sharing clips? Is it too early to start sharing behind the scenes footage or all those kind of things? What do you guys think about that?
I'll just jump in again real quick. I think this comes down to figuring out what you're trying to do with your film ahead of time, and not just making it and then making this distribution and release strategy an afterthought. Because if you're going directly to fans and you're trying to build an audience specifically for that purpose, absolutely it makes sense to put out as much as you can, build those relationships, pull them into your audience, get them really invested in the story and characters, so that the moment you have a film to sell, you can release the Kraken, so to speak, get it right in front of them and channel this attention that you've been building. But if you're going the festival route, or if you're trying to attract a distributor or whatever, you might cross some lines there that you need to know about ahead of time. So it really just comes down to understanding your strategy before you get to the finish line.
Yeah, I think you work backwards from your goals. You look at who do I want to reach, and then for me, when I'm running social media for films, it's not about what I want to get out there. It's all about my audience. So I'm going to spend less time posting about my film than I am posting about, for example, Filmocracy. So we're going to highlight other films that are showing. We're going to showcase the videos that are put out. We'll share when our film is showing, and we'll share a trailer, but we're also going to share how to be part of the global event. You want people connecting around your film, and you want to find reasons why they'd want to, like you said, Rob. And it's not just, I made this really great film. How is my film gonna impact someone else, and whether it's meaningful or fun or entertainment or sadness. I just want to make people feel something. So that's going to inform each one of my posts.
Makes sense.
One thing I was going to jump in is that all this stuff is very important, not just for building, kind of one-on-one viewership, but a lot of the producers come to me when they trying to sell to Netflix and foreign buyers and major studios and such. And though all those buyers are looking at this stuff too, like, I had that conversation with Daniel Myrick, the Blair Witch guy, and he was doing the Starman, which was his latest movie, and he had a Kickstarter campaign for it, and I'm like, why do you need a Kickstarter campaign for $20,000? Don't you have all that Blair Witch money? Like, what are you out there? And he said it was all about. It wasn't really because of the $20,000. It was for the press.
Yeah.
And because he was expecting a major studio to buy Starman. And he's like, so I'm going to send all this stuff to all the studio heads, and I'm going to get Starman on the desk and in front of all these big important distributors now, while Starman is really still in development. And then I'm going to do it again later, and I'm going to do it again. And so then when it comes time for them to make a decision to buy the movie, they're going to already have seen it a whole bunch of times.
Yeah, there's no better pitch deck than a well-run, well-executed, well-presented crowdfunding campaign that proves that there's an audience and that audience can be monetized. That makes it such a much easier sell when you're sitting in that room, being like, look at the numbers. It's happening. They're spending an average of $50 to $100 for a 90-minute, or short, right? So the money's there, the interest is there, the audience is there. Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell friends of mine that are making films that you should be doing a crowdfunding campaign to build your audience and build your earliest fan base, even if you had access to all the money you need. You can always find another place to spend the money, and you definitely need to start building that fan base early. And I think you guys would agree in general with that.
Yeah.
Dan, I also wanted to ask you though, because you're dealing with press at a certain point, and we'll get more into that in a minute. But in the early stages, we were talking in the green room just before this. All of us have learned in our careers that you need to think about press at an early stage too, in terms of materials you're getting and stills and everything else. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you can use when you're going to press that filmmakers should be thinking of at an early stage?
What's real common right now is to do sort of director Q&As and producer Q&As, especially if you've got some sort of geographical tie-in. Those are very popular. If it's going to be filmed in Arizona, you might be able to get, the Arizona Republic will probably write about it if it's going to be filmed, in Phoenix or something. And the same for the Boston Globe. You have to have some sort of a tie-in like that if you want the major press. But even if you don't have any geographical tie-in to a hard copy publication, you can get these sort of second-tier publications like Film Inquiry, Film Threat, Film Racket to write about your film and write about you as a director and write about your successful Kickstarter campaign or something. And those press pieces can be compiled into your sales deck, and that builds the reputation of your movie, and sometimes before your movie's even finished.
Yeah, and I can't remember if it was Lucy or Rob in the green room beforehand. We were talking a little bit about the fact that once you have a set photographer, you'll never go back. Can someone talk about that a little bit real quick?
I was saying that I had done a bunch of films without having that, and then this last film, the budget on the short was just absurdly high, and I was able to do it. I thought, now I can finally do it, and I'll never not do it. From the marketing perspective, it is invaluable to have hundreds of pieces of content that you can pull from. Even if you're doing one piece of content a day, you usually have 1,000 pictures. That's 3 years of content. Just from that. And the interviews, I've ended up using so many of those shots for promo pics as a filmmaker. I have a folder on my desktop that is all of those pictures broken up on how I might use them in marketing categories. So yeah, I would, obviously you want to get a professional as possible, but even if you can't get the local photography student from the college, like get somebody on there who knows what they're doing at a certain level to get that content. You will not regret it.
It's invaluable for social too, because people want to feel like they've got inside info on social. And so behind the scenes photos, B-roll, you're going to want to take those interviews like Dan said, and you're going to want to utilize them because you can use them in so many different ways, and they can live on your socials besides your website and your landing pages. They can live on your socials in so many different ways that I don't think a lot of people realize, whether it's in highlights or in stories. And those are things that don't disappear and will always live there. So you can create something like behind the scenes or interviews. And then you can start also utilizing that kind of initial info to start feeding the journalists via social as you're building those relationships.
Absolutely. Another thing I learned on a film this past year that I'll just throw in there real quick is if you can only afford to have a set photographer a few days, make sure that they're on the days that all of your key cast are there, so you don't end up with gaps in your stills, which happened on a film I worked on a year and a half ago. So I want to jump. We'll come back to certain areas, but to make sure we cover all the bases, we're at a film fest right now. Are film festivals still important in the virtual world to building your audience? And what are the things you can do at a film fest or leading into a film fest to start building your audience and your fan base?
Yeah, I can take the first swing at that. So yes, film festivals, I believe, are still very, very relevant. I think, with Film Festival Mastery, John and I field this question a lot. And the truth of it is that while there are definitely things that we're missing, a lot of the like in-person networking stuff, which is a real bummer, the scope and size of the audience that can now access your film is a exponentially more. And so if you know that and you're building some of your goals around that, and you're building your social media marketing, all of your marketing strategies around that, I'm getting a lot more engagement on my film that is currently on the circuit, even having films that have done really well and had distribution and big platforms and millions of views. I'm actually getting more of the like inbox messages on my social media about this current film because people are seeing it all over the place. So, I'll let somebody else kind of handle some of the things that you can do. But I think in terms of like that question, COVID is a terrible thing. And the changes that it's brought to this industry, I think, are valuable and have been disruptive in a positive way, is my take.
Yeah. But before we go into what you can do at a film fest, I want to take one of the questions from the audience because I think it's a really good one. Drew Davis asks about the role of sites like Film Freeway in regards to promoting and marketing your film to film fests, and any particular advice for student films. Kind of broadening that question a little bit, though, what are the things you can do as a filmmaker to let film festivals know about the audience you've already started building, and like in your crowdfunding campaign, et cetera? And what are the other things you can do to kind of get yourself on the radar of festival programmers beyond just paying the submission fee?
Yeah, there's a lot of big. Did I hear somebody was going to jump in on this, Rob?
Well, I was just gonna like my general feeling. Like I used to love film festivals purely from a marketing perspective, and now that has just like that rug has gotten pulled out. My general feeling is that, again, if you know who your audience is, festivals can be a useful tool if your audience goes to those specific festivals. I think far too often we treat festivals as just like this blanket, people who like movies go to film festivals or pay for film festivals. I made a movie. People at these festivals will like my movie. But that level of specificity or lack thereof just kind of undermines you at every step. You have no differentiation in the market. And you can't go to a festival and say like that gives you no leverage, like what you were asking just a second ago, Brian, when it comes to coming to a festival and saying you should program me. If you don't have a specific reason why your film will matter to the audience that festival is attracting. Yep. And that's ultimately what's going to win at the end of the day. If you have a really tight fit in terms of the programming, and especially if you've done that work ahead of time to build an audience and build some connections. So hopefully you can bring real business to the festival from people who wouldn't have otherwise known about it.
Right. So you need to let them know what you're bringing to them as much as vice versa.
But I just want to stress that, like, I think festivals really need to adapt to be, you know, like, if filmmakers are going to bring more to the table, festivals need to reciprocate. There needs to be some element of like sharing customer data so that filmmakers can follow up with fans. There needs to be ways to utilize technology to get to like share this information and maybe dive into revenue sharing if it makes sense. Because the online model just is so, the value proposition is just so different, and it's kind of skewed now, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention John Fitzgerald, one of the organizers of this, and myself and Leela O'Connor from the Film Fest Alliance just launched a survey that's on IndieWire. You can find it, where we surveyed filmmakers about what they're getting from festivals. We're surveying festivals on what's going on in the marketplace and also distributors. But 95% of filmmakers reported that festivals were not giving them data. And one of the things you can do as a filmmaker is actually request and demand that data, because they're getting data from the platforms they're using, and that data is valuable to you as a filmmaker. So I would just throw that out there, that sometimes being the squeaky wheel in a nice way, it's not necessarily that they don't want to give you the data. They may not have thought about it. They might have been busy.
Top priority.
And if you ask, you might get access you didn't even think of getting. What are some other things that people can do, though, when they're going into the film fest? You know, Dan, you're, I'm assuming, using film festivals as part of your pitch to journalists and to buyers. So what helps you position a film out of a film fest that people might do?
Well, it's funny. It's like when you talk to the big buyers, the big distributors, you know, they'll flippantly say that, you know, film festivals are, you know, worthless. There's too many of them, and the only ones that matter are Sundance and Berlin and Toronto, Cannes. But film festivals, oddly enough, even if they're small, do matter to critics. I mean, we marketed a film that was super tiny, and it had won some award from like the Nashville Film Festival, and some critic got back to us and was like, "Oh, really? Great, I'll review it." And I'm pretty sure that critic did not ever know that Nashville had a film festival, but the fact that somebody had vetted the film and given it an award was instrumental in getting this bit of press. And then the press is important to the distributors. So I think the festival laurels can definitely help differentiate you from the crowd when you try to go get writers to write about your film. And then that press is instrumental. The other comment I'd make is, if you're going to be playing in a festival that happens to be in Miami or Orlando or wherever, that is an opportunity. The journalists in those cities will look at those movies for press. If you're playing in the Scottsdale Film Festival, the Arizona Republic will look at your film. And if you go to them and you pitch them, they will consider it for a write-up or a review. A lot of people don't do that. But if you're...
And do you think the filmmaker should be doing that pitch or rely on the film fest? I'm assuming
film festivals are not. No, they're not going to do it. I mean, unless you've got Ryan Gosling in your movie, and then the film director will say, "Hey, look, we got Ryan Gosling in a movie in our festival. Write it up," and they will, sure. But they're not going to pitch the other 19, 20 films in their film festival. So somebody associated with the film needs to go to the local press. And, you know, I mean, everybody will look at them. If you're playing in a film festival in LA, Variety will look at your film. I mean, they probably won't cover it, but you've got a 10% chance, which is a 10% more than you'd otherwise have.
I think it's also social proof. It's like what you said, like the more people that are, I don't care if it's an indie film that costs $300 and has 2 people in it only, you know, the more people that are writing about it, the more legitimacy it gives your film. And the more legitimacy, the more places you'll go. You'll get into more film festivals. You'll find more followers and fans to then help you get to distribution. People will start sharing it and talking about it, even if it's a marvel of, can you believe that everyone's talking about this 2-person $100 film? It's just social proof. And the more you can get recognition in any way, the more people will start to look at it as a bigger deal than it is.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's important to integrate that stuff into your artifacts, to take those quotes and to Photoshop them into your poster, or to take your Rotten Tomatoes score and Photoshop it into your trailer. I can't tell you how many trailers I look at, big movies, where the Rotten Tomatoes score is prominently displayed throughout the trailer.
So real quick question, Dan, you mentioned on the press side, if I'm a beginning filmmaker or a filmmaker who just spent all their money on their film, do I need to have a publicist, or will those journalists let me approach them directly when I'm doing a regional film fest? What are your thoughts on that?
It's pretty tough to do it yourself, just because the time pressure. You have such a small window, between the time you play in that festival or between the time that your movie debuts, and you've got to really do an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time. Starting with getting people's contact information and figuring out how to pitch them. And if you can do it yourself in that short period of time, then I think it's doable. But man, it's really tough.
And it's what we do as publicists. We always have our PR slam dunks where we know every time I need a film written about, I know these top tier publications are going to write about it because of our relationships. And you're not going to get that as a filmmaker just walking onto the scene.
Yeah, it's really hard to do it yourself.
Yeah, and Lucy, as a publicist, how do people approach you? And not just you, but any publicist. How's a filmmaker?
People just reach out. Just you should, as a filmmaker, you should be talking to a ton of publicists. You should be asking a ton of questions. Ask what other films they've worked on. Ask to talk to some of the directors that have hired them. This is your baby, and your publicist can really make or break how well you're gonna get your first impressions. And so don't be scared to just reach out, email a publicist, get to them on social media, which is probably the easiest way. When you see them post about a film that they've worked on, comment, respond, talk to that film, ask them what they thought of how their publicist did the work.
That's great. And I used to run a couple film fests. For example, I used to run the Atlanta Film Fest, and this was pre-COVID by many, many years. But I always noticed that the filmmakers who had the most sold out screenings and got the best response, that didn't have big stars in their films, were the ones that took control of their film and their destiny and were doing some of their own marketing. Wanted to ask all of you, what are some of the things filmmakers can do right now in a COVID virtual world to push their film when they're going into the festival marketplace? They're playing Nashville, they're playing Orlando. What can they do to build buzz in those local communities for their film?
Yeah, I think one thing that you can do is get connected with the local film community, right? So there's tons of Facebook groups that's like Cincinnati Film Lovers. So go join those groups, get to know those people, engage them, bring value. Don't just get in there and start posting your trailer or posting your showtimes. Talk to them, ask them questions. What movies do you guys like to see? Oh, cool. I've made a sci-fi. Great. You should come to Woods Hole and see it. I think people forget that those local communities, they don't, we live in LA or we work with LA a lot. And so we think everybody thinks about film all the time. And we forget that in these small towns, film is a special thing to them that they don't see in their life all the time. So having a real life movie director in that group can be really, really exciting, and generate a lot of interest for your project. Plus, you're the cool movie director who came in. Like, why wouldn't I go see your film when you've engaged me as a potential audience member living in the area?
Rob, Lucy, any other?
Totally. I mean, 100%. Like, the more people, get a couple screeners out to people so that as you're approaching a festival or as you're approaching a showing, people can start talking about it. It's always best if the buzz comes not from you. It's like any other thing, like a commercial or a brand. If a commercial tells me a steak is great, I might think, okay, that steak looks great. But if like Justin or Brian come and say, I had this steak and you've got to go I'm going to go watch that film and have that steak because people I relate to told me to. So the more you can start building the buzz, if you're going locally like that, the better.
That's great. Rob?
Might be my contrarian take. And maybe I'll just take this out in a direction like away from building buzz specifically for a film festival. Like the question for me starts like way before you ever even get to that stage, because you've identified who the film is for. The next step for me is identifying the people that group who've already earned their trust and attention. And very often it's not necessarily journalists and people who are writing film reviews. It's bloggers, it's YouTubers, it's podcasters, it's people who run Facebook groups, it's people who are influencers, which I hate that word, but that's what it is. It's people who are influencing the niche you're going into. And if you're taking this long game view where you're starting to market from day one, the single highest leverage thing that you can do is to start building genuine, honest to God relationships with these people who are already influencing your fan base. Cause like it's great to build an audience of your own, but you can build 10 relationships like over the course of 5 or 6 months and maybe reach 5-10 million people that way. And you would never be able to do that yourself. So when it comes time to create buzz and time to like actually get your film out into the world, whether it's in a festival context, whether you're releasing it yourself or whatever, it helps to have this army of influential people who are not just like vague influencers. They're not just movie writers, but they are meaningful to the specific context, the specific ecosystem that your film is going into. And it's hard to play that long game, but that's ultimately what I've seen pay off is people who don't just go to influencers at the last minute and like, hey, will you promote me? Hey, will you write about me? It's a lot easier to make that ask when you've shown up and you've served and you've been like a legit person instead of I don't know, someone who's just trying to suck all the life out of the room.
Yeah,
Which means
if I can just say, and there's a fun trick or tip that I give to my clients on how to do this. Go find the film that might be similar to yours. Like I had a sci-fi short, so I went and looked up Prospect, the sci-fi short, and just reverse image search their key art, and you will find all the places where their key art showed up. Literally, Google will give you a list of everybody who wrote about it. And you can start reading them again, engaging them, like leave comments on their article. When you reach out to them, say, hey, I read your article on Prospect and I love that you really focused on this particular piece of that relationship. That's what I'm trying to do with my film. Here's a trailer, or here's a clip, right? And Rob's absolutely right. Like the more you build an actual authentic relationship, the more you will have allies for your film making, your films in the future for life.
Yeah, and what you guys are both getting at there, to me, seems like it's really more about having a conversation and a real participatory conversation than thinking about it as marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Good marketing, I think,
It's
is that.
gotta be more...
Yeah.
Right.
One comment I'll throw in there is if you do happen to be in a big festival, Sundance Con, Toronto, whatever, then buyers are actually going to be there. And then it's really important for you to hit those influencers, those press points, and get your film covered, because you want to have reviews and press come out right then and there, because you could be involved in a distribution negotiation right away. We had one guy who wanted all his reviews timed with his Cannes Film Festival world premiere, and he was like, I need these reviews booked within 3 days because I'm going to have a meeting with Sony 3 days after the con premiere, and I want to sell the movie to Sony. And so that's what we did, and that worked for him, because these buyers may or may not actually watch your movie, but they will read that press.
Right, and so I think to do that best, you need to know, what's your film, and how are you taking it out to the audience? Is it going to be through a big film fest and a distributor, or are you going to need to be relying on going direct to fan, or you've got a film where that's even a possibility because you're good at doing that, and you've got a film that can build that kind of niche audience. So it's a little bit different for every type of film, and you have to really evaluate your film and your abilities and how you can do that. But one thing that I feel like is happening right now, as we're stuck in this COVID virtual online world, is, people are still thinking about their films in the Nashville Film Fest, as you mentioned, or Orlando or LA or wherever. But fan bases aren't just geographic; they're all around the world. So how can we use, if we are in a film fest, how can we activate these fan bases outside of geographic and time zones? What are some of the best strategies for reaching those fan bases, and using a festival premiere to your advantage in that regard?
Yeah, it's a bit of my suggestion might be have a bit of a barrier to entry, but Facebook ads, like go run some basic Facebook ads. I did that for Dances with Films, and yeah, our screening sold out. Like it's not too terribly difficult to get the basics down, and you can geo-target and there's lots of YouTube there's ways to learn how to do that. But I think it's a tool that is going to be more and more important for filmmakers moving forward, is ad-driven traffic.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because there's also a question in the Q&A about Facebook in particular. The question is, since Facebook reduced their organic reach so much, it seems like a waste of money to market there. What are the alternatives? But I think, Justin, you're saying it's not a waste of money. Can we talk a little bit more about Facebook advertising and how it works for films like this, and then after that, some other alternatives?
Yeah. So Facebook, the reason why Facebook ads, I would argue, is kind of the biggest and most important ad platform is because of how granular you can get the targeting. You can literally get fans of this specific film that live in this specific area, that have these specific behaviors on these specific platforms at this specific time. I mean, you can get so niche that when you've done the work we've all been talking about of creating your avatar, creating your profile of your target audience, you can literally just be like, hey, target audience, here's my film, here's the trailer, here's the link to it. And especially when you've got good key art in play, that stuff can really break up the monotony of people's news feeds. And I wouldn't even say organic is dead either. Organic is just, it's you got to fight for it a little bit more. But when you know what to do, and I see Lucy nodding her head, so I'll let her jump in on this. When you know what to do with organic, you can, again, break through the noise, because you're, for lack of a guru term, hack that algorithm a little bit, and get it to work on your behalf.
Yeah, I want to go to Lucy or Rob about this in a second, but in the brand world where I work, people don't even call it marketing anymore. They call it customer acquisition, because you can get a direct relationship between your spin and your audience. It's like very clear, and they become your customer.
Can I actually? Yeah. If you don't I wanted to add one more piece, because we're talking about international too. So I was releasing a film on Dust, the sci-fi network on YouTube, and I ran some Facebook ads to everything outside of the US, and I think I was getting something like 0.0001 cents per click to my YouTube channel. And if you're paying for a US audience, you're lucky to be under 10 cents a click is great. But by actually focusing outside of the markets one might think, you can make your money and your engagement work really, really well for you. I mean, 10,000, I spent $100 and got 10,000 hits on our video.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it gives a sense of perspective for people. You don't even have to put a lot of money there, right? You can spend small amounts. What else can people do in terms of Facebook to begin with, before we get to the alternatives? But if you don't have a big budget, You were talking about, how do you make organic work? Lucy, you were nodding your head in regard
I
to
pretty
that.
much,
Bob, you too.
I pretty much
What are
only
some
do
thoughts?
organic. So I run a social media company. Sorry, I run a social media company, and we're pretty anti-ad. I do absolutely love how granular you can get, and I think it's absolutely amazing what Facebook and Instagram allows you to do. But nowadays, you can, rather than putting out an ad like that, there's so much more you can do. You can use SMS technology, and you can, anytime someone visits your page or a friend of theirs visits your page, like you can do things on social media where you can then infiltrate that's a bad word because it sounds creepy, but it's kind of creepy. You can then, based on like who visits your Facebook page, if we're just talking about Facebook, I can put an ad on your TV in your house the next day, So I'm kind of anti. So if we're just talking about Facebook, I don't like putting ads on Facebook. I feel like a lot of money gets thrown around when I feel like if you are building the relationship and you're doing it organically, you're going to have a longer term, more dedicated consumer.
Yeah.
There was some overlap there.
I was just agreeing that organic is long term going to be probably better for your audience and your project.
And if you're hiring a team, then that's their job. And then then they shouldn't be looking at ads. They should just, like, for example, I have a film right now that's in the festival. So every day, my focus is chatting with anybody that might go see the film or might go see another film. I'm also looking at every film that's in the festival that my film is in, and I'm talking to every film's audience. I'm joining any groups that those films have joined. I'm tweeting, I'm joining all those Twitter lists. I'm creating Twitter lists so that I don't have to even follow these people, but I'm getting on all their radars. Mm-hmm. I just feel like there's so much behind the scenes organically that people don't know because they try to do it themselves. And they're totally going to have success with ads done right. Like, Justin, that's under like 0.00. Like, that's an amazing number. Like, and that's like, right? Like, that's one of those times when you call everybody you know and tell them about that because that's unheard of and that's huge success. I just feel that when you're hiring a team, like you're hiring your publicist, you hire your social media manager, and you make sure that their sole job is not being the social media manager, but being a member of your film's community.
That's such a great read. Thank you. Rob, you've been shaking your head the whole time.
I have thoughts.
Yeah.
So I'm actually fully in agreement with Lucy that I prefer organic, and I generally recommend organic for reaching your people, building audiences. But if we're talking about Facebook ads or really any kind of paid traffic, you, Brian, said the magic words, which is acquiring a customer. And fundamentally, that means owning the relationship with that customer going forward. And the thing that I am seeing that just has me in a deep pit of despair so much right now is filmmakers spending generally too much money on Facebook ads to drive people straight to something like Amazon or drive it to a festival where they know they won't have the, they know they won't have the data afterwards. Because if you have that data, you can, like, even if you lose money to acquire that customer up front, the premise is that you can, by owning that relationship, you can sell them more things. Maybe you have other films, maybe you sell other people's films or products as an affiliate. There's all sorts of things you can do when you have a direct relationship with somebody who's bought something from you. But if you're spending money to drive traffic to Amazon or sometimes YouTube, like YouTube gives you more leeway to actually own that relationship, like further down the funnel. But like, if you're just throwing money at Facebook ads and sending people to Amazon, it's basically tantamount to flushing money down the toilet, because you have the economics of it are very likely not going to work out in your favor. And you're not going to have any idea whatsoever of who that customer was. Yeah. They're just going to slip off into the I don't know, the vagaries of the internet.
You get no data.
So what should people be doing?
So I agree with Lucy on organic. Like, it is more work. It takes, I don't know, it's like Justin was saying earlier. It takes showing up a little bit every day and really engaging wholeheartedly and not spamming people. Cause that's like the thing that I see so much is it's like, hey, you guys watch my movie. And then everybody ignores it. And then you do it again and again and again. Like, it's more than anything, it's participating in communities and being an active, engaged member instead of trying to take. And that's, I don't know, that's not the advice that anybody wants to hear, but that's ultimately what works. And that's ultimately what's going to get people invested in you as a person and the work that you've done that you're now trying to sell. For Facebook ads, I don't know, we could go down into the weeds on so many things, but yeah.
I think sticking above the ads and talking about being genuine and communicating with your audience is the important point here. And it's hard work, but it's work that needs to be done if you want to build that fan base, not just for your film, but for your career. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here, really, is using this conversation. The good marketing is part of a good conversation, so that you're building your career, not just an audience for that one film. I would assume everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
We only have so much time left and so much that we could cover, but Dan, even if I've done a great job building my audience and I've got social media down and I'm an expert and I hired Lucy and she's helping me there, and everything else, at the end of the day, there's a large audience that does get their information from the press. And so any last minute tips you would give to people in terms of right now, breaking through the noise and getting press for a film that might be coming out, like maybe you've gotten lucky and you've sold it to Netflix or you've sold it to whoever it may be. How do you as a filmmaker still get attention on that from the press?
Well, if you're going to focus on the top tier guys, it's going to be difficult unless you have a really nice hook, geographical hook, something really timely that might appeal to them. That's reasonably rare and it's pretty tough. Even if you do, they still might pass because they're so busy, and every newspaper is shrinking. But even if you can't get these top tier journals, I think it's important to get some kind of press that will live on. That's the issue with paid. I mean, I know a lot of folks said that the paid Facebook ads are not great, and one of the big reasons they're not great is that as soon as you stop paying, they're gone. I mean, literally gone within an hour. No one will ever see them again. But that's why press is so much kind of more powerful, because it lives there. And now that we have review aggregators like Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, if you are lucky enough to get the attention of some journalists that are aggregated on those sites, that will be your movie page for years, forever, I guess. I mean, Rotten Tomatoes is already like 30 years old, so it's probably going to be around for a while. And a lot of times that's why people come to us and get the press is not even just for that movie, but for their career, their next movie, right? They have to show what happened with their last movie in order to get funded for their next movie. And that press will be there for it'll live on for quite a long time now because of the internet. So that's really the big bang for the buck that we focus on, as opposed to fleeting paid ads or something.
I would also just point out that what I've always found is good press gives you another excuse to go back to your core audience.
Exactly.
So you keep it in mind for that reason too. But we've only got a few more minutes here, so I just wanted to ask each of you to give your last piece of advice, your words of wisdom, or things you wish you had known before as a filmmaker or film promoter, community builder. What's the most important thing that you think people should take away from this conversation when they're trying to build an audience for their film and their career?
I'll start. So kind of like what I wish I'd known was that being a filmmaker, we're right-brained, we're creative, but these business skills have got to be developed, particularly in this day and age. If you can develop them, though, if you can, again, learn how to find and monetize that audience, you become a huge asset to anybody who would bring you into the fold. As a filmmaker, I can say, like, I get jobs because I can do this particular skill. And as the noise gets more and more and more out there, it's going to be more and more important that filmmakers can run at least the basics of their own narrative when it comes to marketing and building an audience and that kind of stuff. So people get intimidated by it. People shy away from it. People like, oh, I don't like social media. It's like, you got to learn how to use the tools that are available to you to connect with the people that you do actually care about and want to care about you.
Great. Rob?
Yeah. So this is maybe a little bit more of an abstract piece of advice, but for me, like the big aha moment with all of this stuff is that the game is won or lost before you've ever written a word or shot a frame or even gotten into production or anything. The reason that so many indie films fail is that they're fundamentally a commodity in a world that is drowning in commodity media. So the question for me is, how can I make something that's not a commodity? Because if you get that one piece of the puzzle right, it has tremendous downstream effects on every other piece of the process, from your marketing and your audience building, connecting with press because you're going to have something that's unique, that's going to get them more clicks and page views. All of this stuff is so much easier when you take the time up front to figure out who it's for and why they should care, why it's uniquely worth their attention in a world where they've got just thousands of other options at their fingertips. And it really comes down to finding a niche and being specific for somebody.
And Rob, you're being modest. I know you've got some advice on how people can do this on your website. Can you tell us
more
about that real quick?
I have one of those articles that should probably be a book. It's like 11,000 words or something, but it goes extraordinarily into the weeds on how to identify niches for films, which it turns out is a very tricky problem to solve. So if you want, I can just post that into the chat while somebody, because
that'd be great.
It just goes deep. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've read it and I highly recommend it to the audience. Dan, I'm going to come to you next, and then Lucy to wrap us up. Dan?
I would just stress maybe what we've all been talking about, which is, as a filmmaker, even when you're in development stage, set some mental cycles aside and some budget aside to focus on publicity and marketing. I'm really shocked how many people have the build it, I'll build it and then they'll come mentality. And that kind of doesn't really work from what I can tell. Trying to go out and make the best movie you can. And then when it's over, I'm going to think about what I'm going to do with it. And everybody will love it and everybody will beat a path to my door. And that's not going to happen. You got to, engage with one of the professionals on this panel. And even if it's just a consulting gig, even if you're not paying them to do work for you, just to, engage with them somehow early on so that you're thinking, how am I going to get press? How am I going to get attention? How am I going to get the attention of buyers? And think about that early on and set aside maybe budget too is a good idea. So
I agree completely. And Lucy and the dog.
Charlie says, it's the old, I hate the pithy, it takes money to make money, but you're showing the world something that means everything to you, and you have one chance to really get it out there. And I think that people have kind of a mental block when it comes to publicists and social media, and they think it's going to be $20,000 a month. And they think right away, maybe I can do it. Maybe I've got friends that can do it, and maybe, but I feel like you want to, I'm a big proponent of let people do what they're good at, and get someone in place to really make a difference and have honest conversations about what you can and cannot afford. And the right people will want to be on your team.
I think that's great advice. My advice would be to listen to everything you guys said, to hire you as possible, but also you as a creator are your best self-promoter when you participate with your audience. And one of the ways you can do that is by reading some of the things that Rob has just posted here, listening to the advice that Justin has on his website, and hiring people like Dan and Lucy to help you with your project. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to give us this knowledge, and we've gotten some great feedback in the chat. I look forward to connecting with you guys in the real world sometime in the future, near future, I hope. And thanks to Filmocracy and everyone with the festival for having us. I'm not sure if anyone's coming on for a goodbye, but
Thank you.
Thank you all.
It's great.
Everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.